There are people who never raise their voice, never create problems, always help others, always understand everyone, always show up for people. And strangely, they're often the most emotionally exhausted people because nobody taught them how to set boundaries. They only taught them how to be pleasant. And even though they may seem calm on the outside, inside, they live tired, emotionally repressed, and broken because there's something almost nobody talks about. Sometimes being too nice isn't kindness. It's emotional survival. And the problem is that living this way comes with a huge psychological cost. From a young age, many people learned that being loved depended on behaving well. Don't bother anyone. Don't create conflict. Don't make people angry. Don't talk back too much. Don't show anger. Don't make others uncomfortable. And little by little, they learned something extremely dangerous. If I make other people happy, maybe they'll love me. That's where people-pleasing begins, the constant need to make everyone happy. And at first, it seems like something positive because society rewards those people. What a good person. So kind, so calm, so polite. But nobody sees what's happening inside them. Nobody sees the anxiety, the constant guilt, the fear of rejection, the inability to say no, the mental exhaustion, because people who spend their lives pleasing everyone eventually abandon themselves, and that slowly destroys the mind. The problem with constantly repressing your emotions is that they disappear outwardly, but not inwardly. Anger doesn't disappear. Sadness doesn't disappear. Frustration doesn't disappear. It just builds up, and eventually, the body pays the price. Many studies have linked emotional repression to chronic stress, anxiety, mental exhaustion, constant physical tension, insomnia, digestive problems, because your body interprets something very simple. You're in danger, even if the danger isn't physical, because living while constantly trying to please everyone means living in permanent emotional surveillance, analyzing every word, every gesture, every possible conflict. It's exhausting, and the worst part is that many people don't even realize they live this way. They think they're simply good people, but they're not. There's a difference between being kind and being afraid of disappointing others. Many people who struggle to set boundaries feel guilty immediately afterward, and that usually comes from childhood. Children who grew up in environments where expressing emotions was punished, conflict felt dangerous, love depended on behavior, parents reacted emotionally in unhealthy ways. So the child learns to adapt. They learn to constantly read other people's emotions. They learn not to bother anyone. They learn to become whatever others expect them to be. And even though that helps them survive emotionally as children, as adults, it becomes a prison because they no longer know who they really are. They only know who they need to be in order to please others. And this is where one of the saddest parts appears. The people who help the most are often the ones who ask for the least help. They listen to everyone, support everyone, understand everyone, but when it's their turn to talk about how they feel, they stay silent because they spent their entire lives learning that their emotions matter less than everyone else's. And that creates a massive emotional emptiness, a very quiet one, because from the outside, they look functional, they work, they smile, they talk normally, they go out with people. But inside, they're exhausted, and many times they can't even explain why. The problem with living to please others is that you eventually become completely disconnected from yourself. You no longer do what you want. You do what avoids conflict. You no longer say what you think. You say what won't make people uncomfortable. You no longer choose from your identity. You choose from fear. And slowly, you begin to feel something very strange, emptiness. Because a person who constantly represses who they are eventually feels like they have no real identity, and that creates anxiety, because the brain enters a permanent contradiction. On the outside, you show an acceptable version of yourself. On the inside, you hide what you truly feel. And carrying that for years emotionally destroys anyone. There's something very painful that overly kind people discover sooner or later. People get used to what you allow. If you're always available, they'll assume you always will be. If you always say yes, they'll assume you never have boundaries. If you always prioritize others, many people will stop asking how you are. And when you finally try to change, problems begin. Because the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries won't always react well when you start having them. And then comes something deeply uncomfortable. Guilt. That horrible feeling of feeling like a bad person simply because you protected yourself. But setting boundaries does not make you selfish. It makes you emotionally healthy. Many people think setting boundaries means becoming going cold, but it doesn't. It means stopping the betrayal of yourself just to keep others comfortable, and that changes your entire life because you start understanding something important. You are not responsible for emotionally saving everyone. You're not responsible for carrying everyone else's problems. You are not responsible for sacrificing yourself in order to deserve love. And once you understand that, something inside you finally starts to rest. The problem is that many people are afraid of no longer being the good person because they built their entire identity around that role. The understanding one, the calm one, the available one, the one who never fails anyone. But living this way comes with a brutal cost because sooner or later resentment appears, and almost nobody talks about that. The people who repress the most often explode eventually, not because they're bad people, but because they spent years swallowing emotions they were never allowed to express. And when the mind can no longer handle it, they explode from accumulation. That's why it's so important to learn something that should have been taught from childhood. You can be a good person and still say no. You can be kind and still set boundaries. You can love someone and still walk away. You can help others without destroying yourself in the process, because spending your entire life sacrificing yourself for approval never brings real peace, only exhaustion. And here's the most important part of all this. Many people think they need to become stronger, but in reality, they need to stop abandoning themselves. They need to stop ignoring how they feel. They need to stop living only to meet other people's expectations. They need to stop feeling guilty for existing authentically, because the problem was never your sensitivity. The problem is that you were taught to use it against yourself. Maybe that's why so many people feel tired, even when everything looks fine, because they're not physically tired. They're emotionally tired. Tired of pretending, tired of pleasing everyone, tired of overthinking before speaking, tired of holding emotions they never express. And eventually, the soul becomes exhausted. Real peace begins when you realize that you do not need to be loved by everyone. And that's difficult because rejection hurts, disapproval hurts, feeling like you disappointed someone hurts, but constantly betraying yourself hurts too, and usually much more. Emotionally healthy people understand something that changes everything. Conflict is not always bad. Saying no is not always bad. Prioritizing yourself is not selfish. And disappointing certain people is sometimes inevitable once you start respecting yourself. Maybe for years you believed your value depended on how much you gave to others, how much you helped, how much you tolerated, how much you stayed silent. But it doesn't. Your value does not increase because you constantly sacrifice yourself. And you do not need to destroy yourself emotionally in order to deserve love. Maybe real emotional growth is not about learning how to please people more. Maybe it's about learning how to exist without apologizing for it, learning to express what you feel, learning to say no, learning to protect your peace. Because when you spend your entire life trying not to bother anyone, eventually you disappear. And maybe today you needed to hear this. You do not need to become cold. You do not need to stop being kind. You only need to stop abandoning yourself just to keep others comfortable. Because being a good person should never cost you your mental health.